All right, so in this video what we're talking about is plant biology. More specifically, we are hitting hard land plant life cycles. And so in our background image here you can see a bunch of different types of plants. When actuality this is representing a really small amount of the biodiversity available within the land plants. There's something like 350 to 400, maybe 500,000 species, depending on which source you're checking, of extant. That means living species. So we're not even counting extinct species that we can find in the fossil record. Okay, now looking at this can be a little daunting for some new students because there's the idea that, oh, do I need to learn a life cycle for each of these different types of plants? And the answer is no, and yes, kind of. But we'll get to that. So don't be afraid. What I want to do is teach you a really good, clear foundation and build you a template for the land plant life cycles that you can use in understanding the life cycles of more specific groups of plants later on in your plant adventure. Okay, so the first thing I want to start out with is a little reminder on taxonomy. Now there's the taxonomy video that you can watch, which will help you understand land plant classification, and it gives you lots and lots of details. So I don't want to rehash all of that, but what I will remind you is that when we're talking about land plants, we're talking about 4 clades of plants, 4 buckets of ways that we organize plants, and that is the bryophytes. Okay, bryophytes, that's like mosses, liverworts, hornworts, things like that. We have the ferns and fern allies. Okay, so that's ferns and fern-like things, so like Pteridophyta, lycopods, things like that. We have the gymnosperms. Okay. And the gymnosperms are things like conifers, Pinophyta, Ginkgophyta, and then we have angiosperms. Okay, angiosperms, and that's our flowering plants. So a couple of quick things. Once again, gymno means naked, sperm means seed, so gymnosperms are the naked seeded plants. Angiosperms, angio is covering, so that means the covered plants, okay? And so we're looking at bryophytes are non-vascular plants, ferns and gymnosperms and angiosperms are vascular, and then the seed plants are the gymnosperms and the angiosperms. So see that taxonomy video for more details. But what all of these guys have in common is the fact that they sexually reproduce through a process called alternation of generations. Alternation of generations. Okay. What that means is that the life of your average rose or your average pine tree, they bounce between 2 ways of being, okay? The first is the sporophyte generation. The sporophyte generation, and then that is followed by the gametophyte generation. The gametophyte generation. So, if we break this word down, sporo means spore. Phyte means plant. So this generation is our spore-producing plant. And the gameto means gamete. So gametophyte means our gamete-producing plant. Learning to break down those words is super helpful in biology, because anytime you see phyte from now on, you'll know it's referring to some sort of plant. If you see sporo somewhere, you'll know, oh, spores or gametes for gameto. But yeah, so the gametophyte generation is going to give rise to the sporophyte generation, and the sporophyte generation is going to give rise to the gametophyte generation, okay? Now, there are some specifics for alternation of generation. There are ways that it kind of gets modified within some of these groups, but I will have separate videos that'll tackle the life cycle specifically for these groups at another time. Today, we're covering just a real general look at what alternation of generation looks like to help take some of the mystery out of it. So let's see if we can break into that. All right, so we know that we're going to be alternating between two types of generations, and that is going to be our sporophyte generation over on this side, right? And then our gametophyte generation down here. Our gametophyte generation down here. Okay, so we know something has to happen with the gametophyte to get to the sporophyte generation, and something has to happen with the sporophyte to get to the gametophyte generation. So I'm going to add some little brackets here. This is going to be the process that our cells are going to have to undergo to get to the next stage. Okay, so if I want to start with anything, if anything is growing, it has to start with a single cell, right? Because you don't all of a sudden have 10 cells burst into existence. It may happen in quick succession, but you always start with one cell. So both our sporophyte and gametophyte generations are going to start with something that is one-celled, okay? Then, if we want to make copies of ourselves, if our cells want to make copies of themselves, although I'm not actually prescribing any kind of agency to cells individually, that's a whole other video. If we want to copy this, or we want to become an organism of more cells, we have to undergo mitosis, right? Okay, and so same with the sporophyte side. If it wants to become a multicellular stage of its life, it's going to have to undergo mitosis as well. Right? Okay, so we have our single cell passing through mitosis on both sides. This single cell is passing through mitosis on both sides. And what that's going to do is grow and grow through mitosis, and that's going to give us the mature version of our plants. So, a single-celled sporophyte generation cell, which is, by the way, diploid, and we'll get into that more in a minute. There's some videos on haploid versus diploid, but as a reminder, diploid means it has two copies or two sets of chromosomes in the nucleus. So diploid is 2N. So our 2N cell is going to have mitosis, and that means it's going to become a multicell, ULTI, a multicell, and it can only stay diploid, right? Because we're just doing mitosis. So our mature sporophyte is a multicellular diploid structure, okay? So now it's diploid. It's been mature, so now it's going to want to go through, it wants to get to actually the gametophyte stage. So the only thing it can do at this point is undergo some more mitosis. Okay, so it's going to make some more copies. But now our cells are starting to specialize so that we end up with something that's going to be able to give rise to the gametophyte. So that mitosis is going to create a multi-celled diploid structure called a sporangia. Right, a sporangia. Sporangia, it's a, oh, I think I spelled that wrong. Nope, I spelled it right. So that sporangia, it's a structure that holds cells that will become spores, okay? So right now we're still multi-celled. Multi, and we are diploid. So we're still 2N, okay? All right, so that sporangia is created. There we go. And still through mitosis, we are going to create back to a single cell called a sporocyte. Okay, sporocyte. So now this is back to a single cell, one cell. Okay, but it's still diploid. Okay, that's called a sporocyte, and that means it's going to create spores. It's one of the cells within the sporangia is going to become a sporocyte, and it's going to undergo the process of ploidy division, which is called meiosis. Right? Okay, so let's cover that again. We've got a diploid single cell that undergoes mitosis to create multiple copies of itself. That's going to become a mature sporophyte. It's going to undergo mitosis to create sporangia, which is still multicellular. And then one cell will start to undergo, one cell is going to prepare itself to undergo meiosis, and that's going to be called our sporocyte. And when it actually does go through meiosis, our ploidy division, it's going to create a one-celled spore. So you see how we got back to our gametophyte generation, a one-celled spore. And this has to be haploid. We'll put haploid down here. And haploid, it means there's one set of chromosomes in the nucleus, so our haploid spore. So just like over here, we're just going to mirror it. A single cell undergoes mitosis to create the mature plant. So in this case, it's the mature gametophyte. The mature plant has to be multicelled because it's a land plant. All land plants, from unless I'm way off base, are multicellular, and a gametophyte is always haploid. Okay, 1N, perfect. So that's where we are. Just like on the sporophyte, we're going to mirror it again. We're going to undergo mitosis. So we're going to do some mitosis, which is just copying our haploid cell, making more copies of ourselves, and specializing into structures that are going to be able to get us to the next generation, to the sporophyte generation. And the way that it does that is by creating gametangia. So I'll put gametangia. Tangia. So over here, it created a sporangia, a structure to create spores. Over on the gametophyte, it's going to create a structure to create gametes. And it has to do that, again, through this mitosis process. Then we'll have a cell inside our gametangia, which is going to become our gametes. And if we have two different types of sex cells, then we'd have a female one and a male one for our mating types. And these are our gametes. And surprise, surprise, each of these is one cell. So the male gamete is one cell and the female gamete is one cell. It has to be haploid, right? And then our haploid cells are going to undergo fertilization. And fertilization is where, instead of the ploidy division on the meiosis side, we're going to do some ploidy multiplication or addition. Ploidy addition. Okay? And that is called fertilization. There we go. Fertilization. And what that ends up doing is the one end from our male and the one end from our female join together to create a diploid 2N, one of each of the copies coming from their parents. And this structure is called a zygote. Okay, our zygote. So that basically covers it. Just keep in mind when you're going through the life cycles, All right, so I know this seems like a lot, but the thing I want to keep reminding you is if you draw it out in a circle, opposite points match up, okay? So you can never change your ploidy level without going through fertilization or meiosis. So if you're not changing ploidy level, you're definitely doing mitosis, okay? Our gametophyte is always haploid because we're going to have 1 + 1 to equal 2, and our 2N zygote is in our sporophyte generation. So again, check out the other videos on taxonomy, and I'll have some videos coming up soon that breaks down in like a huge amount of detail the reproductive life cycles of each of the individual groups of plants. So have fun!